So I think that introduction by Rajesh sir was pretty perfect. It actually covered a lot of my introduction, so I won't take up more time. But I think the one main point which was standing out in that presentation and also a lot of what we'll discuss today is sort of the interlinkages between climate, nature, land use, human interventions, and I think we hope that will reflect in a lot of these conversations, because when you look at the heat waves in North India, it also has a lot to do with forest cover. When you probably look at the flooding in Bangalore, it also has a lot to do with human interventions and where those tech parks are created. Or when you look at what is happening in the Amazons, right? And now connected to maybe carbon credits coming out of those forests, and the forests are sort of burning. So I think that's the larger theme we'll be covering. And I'll pick up from where we left off in the previous presentation. And this is something which has always been there in my head. The three of us have worked in different corporates. And we sometimes get so bogged down by there's so much to do. As a corporate, you have your supply chain, you have a value chain, you have your own plant and operations. So sir, for you, sort of looking at an entire nation, how do we really prioritize when it comes to climate resilience actions? Like, how do you prioritize which regions, which sectors, which interventions? Like, what is the thought process which goes behind that planning process?
Thank you so much. When government considers this issue, it prioritizes in terms of its relevance to the national development goals, the vulnerabilities of the sectors involved, the vulnerabilities of the communities involved, and also based on our commitment to the international body under the UN FCC. So to take it first, what is the policy and framework for climate action available in the country? The first is the National Action Plan on Climate Change. We have the emissions under the climate change, touching upon different key sectors which are highly vulnerable for climate change impacts. Second, perhaps the National Action Plan is the overarching framework we have in our country. And based on that, the state governments prepare, or rather tailor, their own climate actions under state action plans on climate change, which capture the unique state-specific challenges and the way forward for responding to the impacts of climate change in the state. So currently, several states, more than 20-25 states, have their state action plans in position. And the rest of these state action plans are under preparation, and they are constantly supported by the Government of India as well. And third is our commitment to the international organizations like UNFCCC. We have the nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC, which are also to be honored as per the timelines. And thereafter comes the importance of our national goals to be achieved, like particularly the SDGs. We have SDG goals to be achieved across the several goals. So we prioritize government actions considering these considerations, like key considerations of compliance, the vulnerabilities of the sectors and communities. And if you look at the sectoral vulnerability, perhaps in our country, agriculture sector, and that too when we focus down the dryland areas, the areas which are rain-fed, the areas which are highly vulnerable like Himalayan areas, they acquire higher level of prioritization when it comes to deciding on resource allocation or policy consideration for climate response. And similarly, the technology requirements like agriculture, where we push like irrigation efficiency. And similarly, the concerns with the health sector, where we need to deal with the vector-borne diseases, especially in the context of climate change. And along with that, obviously, there is alignment which is required under GEF, like the international funding sources which we can harness. So the overall policy considerations are having anchoring on these key considerations.
That's very informative. Thank you for that. So Matilda, you've also had an interesting career and sort of was covered in the introduction. You've been in the banking and finance space for a very long time. and have transitioned into CSR almost very effortlessly and seamlessly. Sitting in the speaker's room talking to Matilda, it almost felt like she's been doing CSR for 30 years. Firstly, just a quick one on how that transition happened and where you are today in your organization. Like, there's a lot of interventions around water, biodiversity, the overall climate resilience space that is happening at your organization. So, how is that playing out? How is that connecting to the larger nation's objectives?
So thanks in CSR Box for this opportunity. I think it is a very esteemed panel and also a topic which is very important in today's context. So one is, yes, I transitioned from banking and financial services to the development sector, purely looking at leveraging my strength and how do we basically leverage or channelize capital to where it is actually most needed, right? So that was the reason for the transition and how can I play a role in it. And just to just give an overview of IndusInd Bank, as most of you all will be aware, IndusInd Bank is an Indian private bank and our ethos is good ecology is good economics, and our philosophy for CSR is Sattvam, which means goodness, and our country, our commitment. So taking from this particular philosophy is what we undertake under CSR, and the focus is always to align with larger sustainable development goals in the country, globally and in the country, and also align with national priority. So basis that, we work in aspirational district on holistic rural development. We have identified 5 districts in India. It's Osmanabad in Maharashtra, Begusarai in Bihar, Bahraich in UP, Virudnagar in Tamil Nadu, and Bara in Rajasthan. So this is again like what Rajesh sir mentioned, the way challenges, climate challenges manifest is either excess of water or scarcity of water. So these 5 districts actually represent 3 districts where there's a water scarcity and you have 2 districts where there's excess of water. We work on water and soil interventions because we think that it actually gives you a multiplier impact, not only when it comes to climate, but overall in terms of every other social problem in the rural context. Apart from that, we work on sustainable environment where we focus on water interventions pan-India. We work on renewable energy and we work on afforestation. Primarily talking about what we have learned or what are we always constantly learning basis the interventions that we are doing as part of our CSR portfolio. One is that community involvement and engagement from the start of the project is very critical, and engaging also local institutions like the panchayat, the district administration has actually helped us in identifying what is the problem, also taking cue in terms of the local wisdom that is available, and basically aligning with whatever priorities are there, whether you're talking about the national policy when it comes to climate adaptation, whether it's talking about the Jal Jeevan Mission or when it comes to PM Kusum. So just to give you an example from one of our projects, so when we started working in Virudnagar, which is an aspirational district program, the challenge was that people were still talking about water crisis there in Tamil Nadu. People were actually deserting the villages to move to cracker factories, right, which is also having health hazards. But when we looked at it and we started having discussions with the community, we realized that there is 800 years old network of ponds and lakes and tanks which are all defunct. And these are actually democratizing the distribution of water and storage of water and basically re-energizing the water tables. And we said, why don't we now then start working on resurrecting these channels of lakes and ponds? And strangely, just 1.5 years down, the project, during the last year Tamil Nadu cyclone and flooding, Virudnagar actually didn't face an issue because all the water was stored in those tanks and ponds. Then 165 wells showed higher water levels in those wells. BNHS had some sort of a visit in Virudnagar, and they realized that the biodiversity has improved. So the migratory birds, etc., had increased in Virudnagar. So if you really work with involving the community, working with building community leadership, and working with local institutions like the panchayat, the district administration, you are actually solving for long-term sustainable development, right? So this is, I think, very important. How do you then create user governance, water user governance for judicious use of water, multi-cropping, regenerative agriculture practice. So the entire value chain is important, both your forward and backward linkages, farmer-producer organizations, etc. So one is on community involvement. Other is that when you're talking about technology and innovation, right? So if you're looking at scale, partnerships and technology and innovation will play a very key role in India. And just for an example, again, ASCI, which is the Administrative Staff College of India, they are part of the India WASH Innovation Hub. They have been working with social startups to find, and innovators to find solutions to some of the WASH problems in India. We partnered with them in all these 5 districts because they could also leverage and maneuver the district administration, the bureaucracy in the district. And we were able to identify what are the key problems when it comes to WASH. And basis that, ASCI went to the drawing board, looked at the ecosystem of innovators, and then came up with 10, 12 innovations which could solve those problems in those districts. Now, that was exhibited to the district administration and technical team, and then they identified 2 or 3 good innovations in the district. And those are now being piloted by us using CSR as a catalytic funding in one block. And next week we are having a roundtable in Delhi where we'll showcase, the impact of these innovations when it comes to WASH. And the best part is working in convergence with the government. Now the district administration actually will take that particular innovation and then scale it to the other, blocks in the district. So very important is technology innovation and also convergence with government.
On that very brilliant and emphasized point on innovation and scalability, Dinesh, you have now, over your experience of 2 decades, right from, I would say, processing heavy manufacturing units to consulting to now working in the electronic space, you had a very diverse experience. And if I ask you to reflect on something which is now being referred to probably in hush-hush circles, but something like corporate innovation responsibility, which is becoming like a core tenet also of CSR, and thankfully so, because that is helping companies leverage a lot of their own competitive advantage. So what has been your own experience when it comes to CIR, if I could call it, corporate innovation responsibility, and your learnings for the audience here?
I think we'll keep it at corporate innovation. It's not new, right? It started in 2004 or 2005 when we were heavily depending on carbon trading, where companies have come out with a lot of new projects, right? In a way, it backfired because it did not go the way it wanted, and the projects have come in, which not supposed to be projects just for the sake of receiving the carbon funds, right? And the innovation was huge that point of time, and industries started looking at where they can be innovative in terms of reducing the resources and how can they make the process very effective so that where they can cut down the carbon emissions, right? So that's how it started. And when the whole world understood the importance of reducing the emissions and what are the ways that they need to adopt, and that's where we had UNFCCC, IPCC, and all this coming into place at that point of time. And then suddenly the complete concept has changed, and we had a series of Copenhagen COP meetings where we discussed about the importance of reduction of emissions through innovations, right? And that's where it got picked up. Now, corporates, earlier it was more of a reactive thing. Now it is kind of proactive. and particularly when there is availability of the CSR fund. It's not restricted to that, but somehow it propelled the corporates also to think in that way. So some of the programs that I could refer here, even that we are as Flex part of those programs. One is Center of Excellences, right? And you can it's also part of CSR Schedule 12, where you can fund for CSR incubations and all that. But this is something related to that, and how the Center of Excellences create impacts indirectly in the livelihoods, and directly how it could help communities, right? And you talked about startups, right? And it's one of your core areas as well, right? And what we are focusing on that, set up the Center of Excellences and leverage that to the advantage of the business that we are in. So it's not that we could do something else which is not relevant. So being from the electronics manufacturing industry, how we can better leverage that for that innovation. Right? So when setting up the Center of Excellences, how we can create awareness among the startups, and how they can create products those are sustainable in nature. Right? For example, earlier, if you are aware of the concept Industry 4.0, which was focusing more on the automation and how you can again improve the efficiency of your lines and in terms of producing the products. And when now the another concept emerged called Industry 5.0, you do everything and it is cut across the sustainability. So how sustainable the automation could be, right? And what way it could be improved. Right, this is one of a innovation, and most importantly, right, when talk about communities, one is startup community, and the force of women in technology, right? And we have a separate program called Women in Technology, right? And we start that at school levels. We go to schools and talk to girl students about their interest and where they want to be, and also we conduct leadership programs for them and try to understand where their interests are and pick those girls and mentor them and train them. And not only from the school level, we start from 10th standard, and then we take that up to their completion of professional degree, and then probably help them in providing placements as well. So these are a couple of examples I can quote. And one more innovation I could say, that COVID had taught us a lot of learnings, right? And today CSR being discussed to this extent, I think that is one of the reasons where many innovations have come out, right? And when the world was running for oxygen, and one of the program or one of the initiative that we did is oxygen optimizers. Right? It's not oxygen concentrators, it's more of optimizer. And it was the innovation by the local Tamil Nadu government, and along with one of the Center of Excellences. And what they did, this oxygen optimizer gets into the oxygen feed that goes to the patients, right? It cut down 50% of the oxygen, because when it goes directly, most of the oxygen gets wasted. Only the required amount they'll take. And it reduces to 50% so that enough oxygen goes to them, and oxygen available for the other people who are in need that point of time. And one innovation comes basis necessity, and it should be more of proactive now, considering a lot of regulations that come in. For example, when we export products to other company, Europe has come out with CBAM, which is again more carbon you produce, more tax. It's product to other company, Europe. It's a compulsion behind it. So innovation is a key thing when it comes to corporate innovation, because it's a responsibility not only for their survival, for their business progress, it also for the larger community.
Nice. That was like a blast of insights over there. I wish I could have just constantly kept on taking notes. Just picking up on that point on innovation, and sir, when we were discussing, and this is just for your reference, as it happens with any panel which has a stellar cast, the moderator always thinks of questions, and then the speaker come with their insights, and then the moderator is like, let me just get rid of this paper. So a lot of these questions are actually coming out of the insights of the speaker here. And when you were talking about how technology is also leveraged with the community when it comes to the government, and I have to agree, often not a lot of general audience ever thinks about the government leveraging technology to benefit the community. And a few examples which you were sharing were just brilliant. So just for the audience over here and picking up from that thread, like how has government leveraged technology when it comes to also impacting climate resilience? Your views on that?
Thank you so much. To to reflect on this question, I would like to share with you a story of how we had to realign a project in the state of Arunachal Pradesh. We had a climate response project under National Adaptation Fund, which is for building water resilience in the catchment of Poma River. So to describe the geography, the slope is nearly 70%, which is quite sleepy, like steepy slope. And the project is focusing on water resilience. So initial implementation went in such a way that they created a lot of water harvesting structures, like contour trenches, pits, all in the sloppy forest area. And then what would happen? The geology of the land is such a reality that it's more porous, like sandy soil, basically. So the challenge is that in the event of climate change, which is already happening, and in the event of high intensity rainfall, the landscape will be simply filled. And what is going to happen is all these water harvesting structures are going to pile up a lot of water, and they're going to pull down the mountains and to create a disaster. This is how an approach which was done without enough of a technological appreciation of the situation. So what was required is to realign the project intervention by estimating the water holding capacity and also the slope considerations and how much is the disaster can potentially generate if those thresholds are exacerbated or have been breached. So the point I am trying to say is that unless we bring in technology and verifiable indicators, most of these development projects won't yield the kind of outputs or outcomes we desire to really achieve. And rather, sometimes they will give a kind of a scenario which is more undesirable, which can be broadly called like maladaptation. So when we pick up climate projects, what is most important is that we should ensure that the project is streamlined in the right direction of adaptation. And it should not give or finally end up as a kind of a maladaptation. So to avoid the risk of maladaptation, what is required is a clear appreciation of the risk estimation and risk quantification, again, completely based on technology and science. Of course, local wisdom will help us to drive this process, but then this has to be very credibly established. And once risk level is estimated, definitely we can go for risk mitigation or risk avoidance through communities. And this was also practiced in Arunachal Pradesh, again, as an initial engagement. For your information, I'd like to share that Arunachal Pradesh is the first state in our country, considering the vulnerability of the Himalayan region for climate impacts, have adopted a climate change ministerial level declaration of its own. And of course, we have many states which have state action plans, which I mentioned, but for a first time, any state government has come out with a policy of its own to address climate change. That was Arunachal Pradesh, and that was done in a historic way of its cabinet. The government cabinet went away from the state capital to convene a cabinet meeting in a protected area and conducted cabinet meeting completely in the protected area, dwelling on the issues of climate challenges faced by the Arunachal Pradesh, and passed a declaration called Pocket Declaration, which is available on the website. You can go through it. So based on this policy positioning by the state, an action was taken to build capacity for local adaptation at panchayat level. So the panchayat leadership, consisting of the presidents of the panchayat and also the secretaries, and they were invited for a 3-day capacity building program to appreciate how climate risk can be understood, how they can be recognized, how they can be evaluated, and how the local resources can be estimated to address these issues, and what extra resources are required in terms of financial resources, in terms of human capacity resources, in terms of institutional resources, and they were given that training. The point I'm saying is that to appreciate certain things to the perspective of climate response, where everything is based on MRVs and baselines and not as business as usual, and clear additionality are required, it's important that technology is the first step which we have to take to establish the baseline, to establish the alternate scenario which is distinct and very clearly move forward against the business scenario. And then they are monitored and implemented with monitorable, verifiable, and reportable indicators. And that can be also established only through technology. So the point again, getting again highlighted is the clear application of relevant technology. Here, most useful handy tools are the simple GIS. Nowadays, we have drones also to monitor the capabilities in the field. So we need to empower communities through our capacity building programs or technology assistance, maybe through CSR, maybe through government funds, or maybe through crowdfunding, or maybe through Panchayat's own taxation fund, or whatever. But then this capacity has to be built at a local level so that they can appreciate the risk from climate change side or a disaster side, and then prepare response plans for implementation and monitoring. So this is a requirement perhaps which we need to close. Thank you.
So very clearly the key takeaway here is socio-economic realities at the heart of climate resilience is what is making sense. And on that point, and something because my transition into CSR and sustainability or corporate responsibility, Matilda, happened a decade back. And at that time, I remember when we used to talk about green finance, it was a lot about exclusionary or screening funding. Like if you don't invest into weapon manufacturers, you're probably the funding is green. But how it has transitioned in the last 10 years now, green funding, sustainable bonds, or even when you look at social bonds in general, especially during and after COVID, we're now looking at exclusively funding going into resource extractive industries, carbon intensive industries, or into underserved areas. So the concept itself has developed so much in the last 10 years. So for the audience here to share a bit more insights on how the idea of green finance or blended finance really enables the climate transition for us. So over to you.
I think this is a very pertinent and very important question. I think yesterday the Blended Finance Company, had a session on, how blended finance through CSR can solve some of the climate issues in the country. So purely when we look at capital, obviously, each capital comes with its own characteristics, right? And if you're looking at solving the problem in a sustainable manner and long-term, private investment or private capital will have to come in to scale. And the whole thought process when you're looking at blended finance, which is still very niche, there are a couple of structures which are under discussion, is that how do you basically leverage the strength of each and every critical stakeholder, because this cannot just be solved by CSR or cannot be solved by government policy, or it cannot be solved by an implementing partner working with the local community. It will require everything from a proper baseline to research, both in terms of primary research or secondary research, technology innovation, and data tracking, right? Data AI in terms of how that particular, intervention or is being scaled up. And that's why it becomes very important that you actually use different type of capital. So if you look at, CSR can be more of catalytic funding coming in, where they're trying to focus on research, proof of concept, work on building the capacity of the community or of the institution, the local institutions. You will have, a DFI or a multilateral organization which will come in with maybe a risk-sharing participation, where, some of the large-scale projects will have huge financial risk, also because the gestation period will be longer, right, in terms of time frame. And we are all, looking into more of a forward-looking and in the future. So these organizations can come with some sort of a risk guarantee. You will have some other philanthropic organization which can come in terms of interest subventions, because the money or the capital in terms of philanthropic capital, it can be stretched much for a longer period if it is again catalytic in terms of, coming in terms of reducing the cost of capital for private investors. You have the implementing partners who come and actually deliver it on the ground level. So how do you actually put this entire structure together and with a clear monitoring governance structure so that you can track the progress and have course correction over a period of time? So couple of spaces where conversations are going on is one is on greening the rural ecosystem, right? You're talking about solar irrigation pumps. You're talking about solar drip irrigation. You're talking about what Rajesh ji mentioned, just introducing climate resilient practices is not enough, because when you look at organic farming, it is much more perishable. So it's a very important in looking at the supply chain. You have to look at the cold storage system. How do you, basically take that perishable product from one place to the other? So these are all high capital intensive interventions. There are a lot of government related subsidies when it comes to even solarification. For example, we are working in a project in Haryana to solarify government schools, right? Can this be taken as a pan-India project where in one aspect you are providing a right to education to the children in rural India, because there's a load shed, and during the farming season, the load is further diverted to farming activities. So clean energy, carbon sequestration, there's a lot that can be weaved around there. So wash innovations, right? You need capital again to scale up these innovations. You have Nav Samruddhi, which has come with a big, $50 million line that they are committing to finance this, MSMEs. But there is, of course, a high risk there. The returns are lesser. How do you then look at, financing MSMEs who are working specifically when it comes to technology and innovation in WASH? So I think there is a lot of, work which is being done. You have, team from India Climate Collaborative. They are again working with, organizations to try to work out blended finance opportunities in India. But that's a really big space, which I think if you're really looking at scaling, and trying to solve some large-scale problem, which takes time, resources, and optimal use of these resources, along with technology and innovation, then I feel that's the way forward.
Just a quick note for the organizing team. This timer here includes the Q&A, right? I just want to, this includes the Q&A. So I'll close like 5-7 minutes before. Okay, we'll jump a few questions so that you all get opportunity also to ask. But the last round of questions, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So Dinesh, for you, and picking up again from the core and the crux of the conversation here, your organization has like a carbon emission reduction target of 50% by 2030. You've signed on to SBTi, so doing everything in a very scientific way, keeping the just transition view also in mind. Now, when it comes to climate resilience and thinking beyond your own operations for companies, thinking of the larger supply chain, the scope 3 as we call it, which for an electronics or any manufacturing company could end up being a good component. So how do you leverage what you're doing within your operations when it comes to climate resilience infrastructure, planning processes, into also sort of helping and assisting your supply chain partners?
Right. So I was talking about the carbon emission during your last question. Right. So what companies are doing right now, right? So when they calculate their emissions, it's mostly based on the reference data. Right. They go to IPCC or ACROBILIS, whatever the database that is available. Whether that will make relevant to your process, your operations, I doubt. I completely not aligned with that, because your emissions will definitely vary based on the kind of operations that you are in. As part of that, one of the, I could say it's a kind of relating to the previous question of innovation. With Tamil Nadu government and along with one of our startup, we are developing a tool. So this tool will calculate emissions based on the operations at each and every task level what the company is into. For example, if you take, I'll deviate from electronics manufacturing now. I'll take for example, agri or poultry, for example, right? So what generally when we get a milk, right? So how you know what is the amount of carbon dioxide emissions associated to the packet of milk, right? And each and every producer cannot give the same amount. But if you take the reference data, it's going to be the same. But if you take your operations data, then it will vary, right? I think it will not be too far for us when you go to the supermarket to choose a product. Say if you buy a water bottle or milk packet, which is less carbon intensive, right? So that is something we are working on. We want to do that. To what extent we would achieve, we are not sure, but definitely can't be 100% because somewhere we have to definitely rely on the reference data. But wherever we could able to take the real data and say, kind of giving the confidence score, say your water bottle amounts to this amount of carbon dioxide emission, and which is 50% of confidence or 60% of confidence, right? Meaning 60% of data is real, only the 40% data. So over the period when we try to bring that at the micro level, then probably it will do the macro part and we could able to achieve something. So I have not talked about the Flex, coming back to what Flex does. We are electronics manufacturing. And one of a unit or one of a business shared services that we have in Bangalore, it's about the circular economy, right? And we manufacture, earlier we used to manufacture mobiles and all that. We moved out strategically to focus on more on, low volume business. Of course, it's high profit thing. For example, networking components, and we are also partner of Cisco. We recently launched our partnership with Cisco, and some of the network products, right? And when it gets repaired, and if you want to remanufacture that, and kind of supply chain involved is huge, and the kind of materials that you use, the resource that you use is going to be a lot. So Flex is one of a global leader in this area. What we do, we import from any part of the world. We import that a device into India, and we repair here, and we export it back. And we have a huge, excellent government support on this. For this is completely duty free, and all that provisions have been given by the government, right? And what we do as part of this, when we send the product back, for the usage, it's almost new, right? And it goes to the same consumer. It's not refurbished and we are selling it to other market. It goes to the same consumer. The entire cost is around 20% from the original 100% of. If you buy, for 10 rupees, it's only 2 rupees. So that way, that is the difference. And in the process, it's not only the cost. Just imagine the kind of carbon involved into this, right? Sourcing of materials is completely cut down, and you just importing, repairing, and exporting back. But if you look at the facility in Bangalore, it's almost the manufacturing facility. We have right from manufacturing equipments to the testing equipments, which will complete the edge of the technology, where we do everything right from, and even the kind of resource that we have employed. These are high-skilled people. So this way, this is one of a circular economy thing that we are focusing on, and where we could able to cut down emissions to a larger extent, and that way it saves a lot of things. That's where we are SBTi. We could able to meet it that way, and not only one of the examples that we can, but apart from that, the other process that we have in our manufacturing. I talked about the Industry 5.0, which is we are very much enabling and try to see wherever we could cut down our emissions across the supply chain. And we have a 2030 target based on SBTi, and so that where we could stand in terms of reducing the emission. And this tool is going to be the game changer for us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Just a final round of quick closing questions probably to all of you. Sir, for you first. We look at India's national net zero goal going into 2070, but we also see those, green shoots of certain regions or certain sub-state areas where we potentially see us reaching net zero in that region at least much before. So again, to close out from your side and also to talk about those ambitions, probably a few examples which you can share where this is actually happening or on track to happen.
Yeah, yes, thank you. I'll be brief. As I said, state action plans on climate change, they are leading this initiative to, get this change over done. But then certain states like Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, they have put on their own ambitions, including Himachal Pradesh, which are like, if you talk about Himachal, it's 2030. And if you talk about Gujarat, it's 2070 with the clear milestones at the 30 and in between. So states have identified their own ambitious goals, which are all complementing with the national goals to be realized. Of course, much of the actions are focusing on clean energy, energy efficiency, and hydro projects, and also on land use based engagements on agriculture, horticulture, and so on. So in sum, I would like to say that yes, there's a great lead of complementary actions happening from state side, along with the National Action Plan Climate Change, which is driving our journey towards realizing the goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And probably to close out with you, Matilda and Dinesh, with your closing thoughts, if you have to listen to this conversation overall and also your own experiences, if for all of us here you have to give that one key takeaway of something which needs to change now in terms of how climate resilience actions are happening or in terms of the partnership ecosystem that we are talking about, what would that one key thing for you be?
I think this word has been used regularly in every session. I think so, partnership and collaboration. So I think multi-stakeholder engaging with the community, I think that is a key, because you need to work from bottoms up. At the same time, you need to align with, institutions, government priorities. So if you all work together in a collaborative manner, I feel that's the way forward. And also very important is the flow of capital towards this project. So that's where the blended finance and private capital coming in will be really key. And top it up with technology and innovation for scaling it.
Dinesh, over to you.
Right. So for me, it's funding. So I was always talk about this. Right. Banks have more funding than the manufacturing companies. We have limited no scope to spend. But that is not the case. It's not always the availability versus need. I think companies should look beyond, and companies are looking beyond that, and they have their global foundations where they can spend on projects. The main key takeaway is that the kind of projects that Matilda and Indus is doing, it's something beyond understanding for some of the element, because the way they involved into technology and the kind of impact that they are creating, I think that is something we could also look at how we can create impact in those areas where we talked about nature-based solutions, but company cannot get into all at once. So that is the challenge when you have the limited funding, and many people also knocking your doors when they know you have CSR, right from MC to all stakeholders come and hit you and asking for you have CSR money, what you're going to do for us, right? And not only considering the local thing, we should also focus on national projects, which is a skillfully come out from this conversation. I think that is one takeaway definitely I'll watch for.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause probably for the panel. We have some time remaining for a few questions. So let's probably jump into it straight away. Yes, we'll pick up from you. You had a question previously. Just quick introduction and then your question.
Okay.
Just to
So I'm working on sustainable innovations, as Dr. Dinesh mentioned. So my question is, scaling sustainable innovations is one area we're working on. So I wanted your views on how we can take it forward by scale. For example, you mentioned about working on a couple of products in the electronic sector. So let's say I'm working with a company whose electronics are different domains, right? So there, it's not only about the infrastructure, but also about continuously making sure that innovation is happening in that center of excellence. And for that, you need continuous problem statements to be generated by the company, the corporates, right? So when we go and ask them, say, give me a list of all the problem statements that someone can solve, or the students or someone can solve, there is a little apprehension there, because it's more of an internal concept. So even you spoke about importing some products. So the same product can be made here by some student given as a challenge or an innovation challenge or so. So how do I appeal to the people to scale this, since you've been in this space, to scale innovations? That's my question.
Right. So to scale innovations, we are talking about it. Partnerships are very important, right? As individual company, you cannot do it alone. In my opinion, this is my personal opinion. That's the reason one of the initiatives that we are also doing, we are trying to partner with other companies in our neighborhood in similar industry. So one of the projects which I was thought of discussing here was, right? So we talked about model village, model, industry. So this is something we are working on along with the multiple stakeholders, including the state government, which is on sustainable street perimeter. So which is a SIPCOT area, how we can make the complete SIPCOT area into a sustainable stuff, right? So here, what are the infrastructure, or what are the facilities that you would need, right? Definitely center of excellence is one. So center of excellence, meaning it's not, projecting what your company do, rather It's a platform for the startups, those who can come and leverage the facility in that area, right? They can come in, they can work on their own problem statement that they have, and we'll provide them platform to work on, and we can provide them softwares, we can provide them technology, and we can mentor them so that they can come out, they can achieve what the research they want to right, and what the idea or what the concept that they have. So once done, and with the help of government, what we are also trying to just to scale this, and we are helping them to go to market, right? So you ask us what is the advantage for the companies? This is a huge advantage. The indirect thing is that when the product becomes successful, when you're able to achieve that, he'll come back, he will find a partner who can manufacture that. If that product becomes a hit, then we'll be manufacturing for them. It's a huge opportunity for them, right? So in this space, instead of limiting to the industry, when I talk about the sustainable Sriperumbudur, if you look at the Sriperumbudur area, it is up for, it's a Detroit of Asia, you call it, right? So it is most of the automobile companies there, right? And electronics is booming. So we have taken for POC, the automobile industry, we have them, all the companies on board, we'll work with them, and we, try to find out what we could do. This meaning here we is not the company I'm talking about, here the multiple stakeholders, because I represent industry them. It is the local government, and it is the industry, automobile industry body, and also the complete SIPCOT. All officials are involved in this, right? It is, so what is the benefit of this? We not only address the issue, and we also help the villages surrounding that in terms of employment. That is one, and also use the spaces available in the company, because it's an industrial area, right? Most of the spaces are vacant, and what can we do as part of nature-based solutions? Can we do some kind of agri inside the company and give the pass the livelihood benefits to the villages there, right? So this is something we are working on. This is a huge opportunity. Multiple stakeholders come in, and from the students' perspective, right, it's a huge opportunity for them. So when we start with automotive industry, it will spread to other industries as well. So that is one way of scaling that we are looking at, and probably as we go, we know more on that one. Thank you.
My questions.
We'll take two more questions probably. Yes, you had your hand up in between. Yes, go ahead, please. The one who's sitting. Yeah, you.
Hi, I'm Sumantra from Protivity, and my question is to Matilda. I know Matilda has been working a lot on climate resilience. One of the challenges working on climate resilience, especially in CSR programs, is long-term visibility, because climate resilience tends to be a long-term kind of impact which has. And CSR programs are generally, the visibility is 1 year or maximum 2 years. So how do you plan to address such challenges of working on climate resilience using CSR funds?
I think that's a very good question. One thing is that just to bring in the new perspective, CSR necessarily doesn't work on 1 year. The MCA actually talks about working for 1 + 3 years. If you're looking at pure, basic sustainability of the project. So the 1 year is when you start in the year, you could have conversations, and that could get fructified, and you would start a project maybe the start of the year or maybe in the fag end of the year, and then you give full 3 years for a project, right? So that, because when you're talking about sustainability, when you're working on water or agri-related intervention, you will never see anything that you'll be able to achieve in a 1 year. So I don't think so. Corporates who are looking at, really working on a problem statement need to give a longer time frame. And you can obviously break the project into multiple projects. So for example, in the project that you're working in the aspirational district, we know that transformation will take maybe 20-25 years, because it is more to do with behavioral change of the community. We have so much of prejudice, we have so much of biases that are already ingrained in our casteism, etc. Those, issues further derail the actual, sustainability of the project. But having said that, you can always break a project into multiple legs. For example, if you're starting with a water-related interventions, the initial work, which will, either the watershed treatment or the bunding, etc., will take, a year or two. After that, you will see that the water storage is happening. At the same time, you work with the community on water judicial use, water governance, committees that you form with the community and the local institutions, right? That's where you build in sustainability. So you can create water capacity, but if the water is not judiciously used, you are not using multi-cropping, you are not moving to regenerative agriculture, that project is actually not having the right impact. Then you basically take it forward in terms of providing market linkages. So within a project, you need to be invested for a long time to really see sustainability coming. So 1 year projects, you can do 1 year project, you're doing some skill development, etc. Or you can just, take a waste and recycle it and, just showcase that this much of, so much of carbon emission is what you have been able to, save or sequester. But if you're looking at CSR really, solving problems, it's a long gestation period. And like I said, the other way that you can have CSR coming in, where CSR can come as the initial putting up the theory of change of proof of concept. So you can basically work on a smaller project in X number of villages or a block. And once you have showcased the proof of concept in a time frame of 3 to 4 years, you can then create a center of excellence and then go in for, a multiple collaborative collective structure where you have other organizations coming and picking up the project and taking it to the next level.
I've been warned with dire consequences if we don't stop the panel.
Yes.
But I think more importantly, the speakers will remain here even after the panel. So please feel free to reach out to them. I'm sure they would love to have even longer conversations. But to keep the
Yes.
overall session on track, we'll stop now. And over to you
sure.
probably.